Imagine a moment so small it should have passed unnoticed, just a parking ticket, a routine case on a quiet morning. Yet the instant she stepped into the courtroom, you could feel it, this wasn't routine at all. It was the kind of silence that settles before a storm, when even the air seems to hold its breath. Eliza Marlowe entered like someone walking into a boardroom she owned. 26, impeccably dressed, every line of her posture carved from practiced entitlement. The hum of conversation faded as people recognized her, a few leaned in to whisper, others straightened as if trying to be invisible. She didn't notice any of them. Her eyes were fixed on her phone, the cold blue glow lighting her face like a shield. She didn't sit. She didn't even slow down. She flicked her hair back, tapped rapidly on her screen, and said into the mic of her earbuds, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear, "Relax, I'll handle this. It's just a ticket. Dad said it's all good." The words landed like a stone in water, concentric ripples of discomfort, disbelief, irritation. The clerk glanced at Judge Caprio, who didn't move, but something in the tilt of his head shifted. A tiny change, yet the whole room felt it. He had seen arrogance before, but this was different. This was a child who had never been told no in her life. When she finally looked up, she offered him a half-smile. Not warm, calculating. "Let's make this quick, Judge. I'm sure we can arrange something reasonable." Someone in the back actually whispered, "You've got to be kidding me," and a woman in the second row covered her mouth with her hand as if trying to trap the shock inside. The charges were simple: speeding, ignoring a posted sign, parking in a disabled zone. The kind of violations ordinary people paid without debate. But she had filed a petition calling the citation erroneous, unjustified, and improperly issued. A petition usually reserved for far more complicated cases. Judge Caprio leaned forward, the wooden bench creaking softly. His voice, when it came, was gentle but anchored. "Miss Marlowe, please take your seat." She blinked, as if the instruction itself offended her, then sat down with a sharp exhale, one leg crossed elegantly over the other, tapping her heel against the floor in an impatient rhythm. The phone remained in her hand, held like a safety device. The courtroom watched her more closely now. Little details grew loud, the clipped tap of her fingernail against the phone case, the restless rustle of her designer coat, the faint scoff under her breath. All of it adding to the portrait of a young woman who believed the world, this courtroom included, existed for her convenience. Caprio studied her quietly. Not angry. Not impressed. Simply present, in a way that made the entire room lean toward him. "Miss Marlowe," he said, "in this courtroom, nothing is arranged. Everything is examined." The room fell utterly still. Even Eliza's tapping stopped. And in that moment, before any evidence, before any questioning, the story shifted. What began as a minor violation became something else entirely, the first fracture in the polished surface of a life built on influence, expectation, and inherited authority. Everyone felt it. Even she did. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Caprio let the silence breathe for a moment longer than necessary. It wasn't theatrical, just enough space for the temperature in the room to settle. Then, with the steady tone of someone who has seen every kind of story walk through those doors, he asked. "Miss Marlowe, tell me a little about yourself." The question landed strangely. Simple, polite, harmless. But Eliza reacted as if he'd crossed a line. She raised her chin. "What does that have to do with a parking ticket?" A few people exchanged looks, recognition, maybe a touch of pity. They'd seen her type before, just never this young, this unfiltered. Caprio didn't flinch. "It helps me understand the person behind the citation." She huffed softly, a sound halfway between annoyance and disbelief. But she answered. "I'm the Vice President of Community Affairs at Marlowe Bank," unofficially, she added, trying to sound casual. It wasn't casual. The words were too polished, too practiced, clearly a line she'd repeated many times. "You grew up around the bank?" Caprio asked. Basically lived there, she replied with a dry laugh. For just a second, barely a flicker, her eyes softened, like she was remembering something heavy. But she quickly smothered it beneath the same confident expression she walked in with. He continued gently, "What do you do there, specifically?" She hesitated. It was the first real pause she'd allowed. "Well, it's more about representation. I attend events. Fundraisers. Press things. My father says I'm the face of our public outreach." She shrugged, but her voice dipped slightly, losing some of its sharpness. "It's a title, not a job, really." Someone in the audience let out a sympathetic breath, unexpected, even to themselves. Caprio nodded slowly. "And your father, he's the owner of Marlowe Bank?" A small smile tugged at her lips. Pride mixed with something else, habit, maybe. Obligation. He built it from nothing. Always working, always fighting for more. He used to take me to board meetings when I was 13. Her voice softened, and for the first time she almost sounded human. Vulnerable, even. But then she said the sentence that changed the room. "He always told me, rules are for people who can't afford exceptions." The reaction was immediate. A low murmur swept the benches, part outrage, part disbelief, part sadness for the very idea of a father raising a daughter on that philosophy. A woman in the front row shook her head with a quiet, "That's a shame." Eliza's posture stiffened. She'd heard the reaction, and it rattled her. Her fingers curled tighter around her phone. Caprio didn't attack. He simply let the words hang there, as though allowing her to hear them the way everyone else did. "And do you believe that now?" he asked softly. She blinked, caught off guard. I don't know. That's just how things work when you grow up the way I did." Her voice cracked when she said it. Barely perceptible, but real. She tried to recover, to rebuild the persona she arrived with. "Look, I'm under a lot of pressure. People expect things from me. Public appearances, charity speeches, interviews. I don't really have time to stress over minor tickets." Another murmur rolled through the room. Caprio tapped his gavel gently, not to scold the audience, but to center her thoughts. "Miss Marlowe," he said, "pressure doesn't excuse behavior. It shapes it. And sometimes, it reveals it." Her lashes fluttered once, uncertain, unsettled. He leaned back, studying her with quiet empathy. "You said you grew up in that world. But you didn't choose it. That matters." Her jaw tightened, as if she wasn't sure whether he was comforting her or cornering her. "I was 12 when they first put me on stage," she muttered, more to herself than him. 10 when they taught me how to pose for the cameras." A few listeners exhaled, soft sorrow, soft judgment. They understood now, she was raised like a brand, not a daughter. Caprio let her speak without interruption. "I didn't ask for any of that," she whispered. "But it's my reality. And, sometimes you start believing the things you're told." When she finished, she pressed her lips together as though afraid she'd revealed too much. The courtroom felt different now. Not sympathetic, not forgiving, just awake. They weren't looking at a spoiled heiress anymore. They were looking at someone built for an image, shaped by control, conditioned to treat privilege as oxygen. Caprio folded his hands. "Thank you, Miss Marlowe," he said. "Now let's examine why your story doesn't match the record." Her breath caught. The storm that had been building quietly finally began to move. Caprio slid the folder closer, adjusting his glasses with a slow, deliberate movement. The calm before a very specific kind of storm. Eliza straightened in her seat, sensing, correctly, that something in the air had shifted. "Miss Marlowe," he began, tone even, "you've explained the stress, the expectations, the circumstances. Now let's look at the facts." He tapped the first photograph. The image projected on the small courtroom screen showed her sleek silver SUV parked squarely in a handicapped zone. No placard. No permit. Just entitlement in high resolution. Eliza swallowed. I already said, I might have been rushing. He didn't respond to that. He simply turned the next page. This vehicle, it's registered not to you, but to the Marlowe Community Fund. Correct? A confused ripple moved across the benches. A charity vehicle in a restricted zone, it didn't sit right, even with those who tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Eliza hesitated. It's one of the cars we use for outreach events. Caprio lifted an eyebrow. Not accusing, just evaluating. Outreach events conducted in a handicapped spaces? She opened her mouth, then closed it. The first hairline crack in her tone became a fracture. I didn't realize which car I was using that day. He let that hang a second. You said earlier you were alone. But this report, he tapped the document handed to him by the court clerk, indicates otherwise. Her face flickered in a way she couldn't control. Tightening cheeks. Eyes darting. A slow inhale that didn't steady her. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Caprio nodded to the clerk. Another sheet slid forward, quiet as a blade. There's a witness statement from the ticketing officer. He didn't file it to make trouble. He filed it because the vehicle was tied to a charity, and the circumstances didn't add up. He read it aloud. Driver appeared accompanied by an older male. Identified him by resemblance to the Marlowe family. A ripple passed through the gallery. Recognition. Suspicion. A simmer beginning to boil. Caprio didn't meet the audience's gaze. He kept his eyes solely on her. Was your father with you that day? The color drained from her face so quickly it startled even those who disliked her attitude. She gripped her phone so tightly the case creaked. My father, he sometimes borrows the car. Maybe he was, maybe that's the day he. She couldn't finish. The words collapsed in her throat like brittle glass. Caprio's voice softened, which somehow made it worse. This isn't about implicating him, Miss Marlowe. This is about your honesty with this court. She blinked rapidly, fighting panic. I'm telling the truth. There was a lot happening. It's hard to remember. He turned the next page. A close-up photo taken by the responding officer. The car door opening. A tall man stepping out. Only half his face visible, but enough. Enough that a dozen people in the room inhaled sharply. Even from the low-quality still frame, anyone who'd driven through Providence in the past decade could identify him, Robert Marlowe, the banker who funded half the city's political campaigns. Eliza stared at the image, throat tightening. For a split second, she looked like she wanted to run. Caprio watched her carefully. Not a trap, just truth, unfolding. Miss Marlowe, he continued, there's also a timestamp discrepancy. You said you were dropping something off before an appointment. But the vehicle was stationary for 42 minutes. People leaned forward. 42 minutes wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. I wasn't inside the building the entire time, she muttered. Caprio waited. Her jaw twitched. I stepped out. Silence. The kind that feels like it rearranges the oxygen in the room. Where? He asked. She hesitated too long. Then the clerk spoke quietly from behind the bench. Your Honor, the officer's notes indicate she walked across the street. A buzz tore through the room. Across the street from the clinic, the location of the violation, wasn't a medical building, or a charitable institution, or anything she could spin into necessity. It was a boutique cafe known for influencer photos and $9 pastries. Caprio faced her again, eyes steady. Were you there, Miss Marlowe? Her lips parted. Closed. Parted again. Finally, I might have stopped for coffee. The entire room inhaled. One long, heavy breath. Somewhere in the back row, a woman whispered, "Oh, sweetheart, no." Caprio pressed his palms together gently, like he was settling a restless tide. So the community fund vehicle, parked illegally, in a handicapped zone, was used for a coffee run. Each phrase fell like a weight. Eliza's voice cracked, thin as paper. I didn't mean for any of this to be. He held up a hand. Not harshly. Just firmly. Miss Marlowe, intent matters. But actions matter more. And your actions show a pattern. She closed her eyes for a moment, just a moment, but long enough for everyone to see the truth. Her confidence wasn't real. Her bravado wasn't stable. Her story wasn't holding. And the worst part, the part she could no longer deny, was that everything she'd grown up believing was finally, publicly, falling apart. Caprio exhaled slowly, turning the final page in the folder. We're not done, he said. And the room braced for what came next. Caprio's tone shifted, still level, still calm, but carrying a quiet gravity that made the room tense. I'd like to hear from the officer who issued the citation, he said. A uniformed man stepped forward, posture straight, voice steady. Your Honor, when I approached the vehicle, the driver wasn't alone. Eliza looked up sharply. The officer continued, choosing his words with care. There was an older gentleman in the passenger seat. When I explained the violation, he leaned toward me and said. A pause, so heavy it felt like a held breath. Just write it up, son. We'll take care of it upstairs. The room erupted in low, shocked whispers. Everyone knew who upstairs meant in this city. Eliza's reaction was immediate, defensive, trembling around the edges. That officer is mistaken, she snapped. Everyone thinks they know us. They never do. But her voice was just a little too sharp. Too quick. As if she was trying to shout down a truth she feared more than a ticket. Her fingers tightened around her phone, her jaw twitched. She wasn't protecting herself anymore. She was terrified of what this meant for him. Caprio didn't challenge her outburst. He simply lifted a small photograph from a separate envelope. This image was taken by a municipal camera later that same afternoon. He placed it where she could see. It showed the same charity vehicle. The same parking lot. And a man stepping out, older, silver-haired, unmistakably her father. The silence was instant and suffocating. Someone in the back row breathed in so sharply it echoed. Eliza stared at the photo as if it were a verdict already written. Her lips parted, then pressed tight again. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. Caprio gave her space to speak. She didn't. So, he said softly, this car belongs to the Marlowe Community Fund. His fingers touched the folder. A fund whose resources are legally restricted. Who authorized personal use of this vehicle? Her throat tightened. A tiny tremor ran through her lower lip. She didn't look arrogant now. Or untouchable. She looked like a young woman realizing she had been shielding her father long before she understood the cost of it. I can't answer that, she whispered. Caprio let the silence deepen, not cruelly, but purposefully. A silence that refused to let her hide. Miss Marlowe, he said at last, truth matters here. Not status. Not fear. Truth. She blinked fast, fighting tears she refused to let fall. Her breath came uneven, almost shaky. The gallery watched with a mix of disappointment, sympathy, and something more complicated, recognition, perhaps, of a child loyal to a parent who asked too much. She whispered, barely audible, he said it was fine. He said nobody checks. He said, it's how things are done. Her voice broke. And for the first time since she walked in, perfect, polished, unshakable, Eliza Marlowe looked unbearably human. The courtroom didn't judge her now. It simply waited for what would come next. Caprio asked the clerk for the financial packet. A thick folder slid across the bench, its weight alone suggested trouble. He opened it carefully, page after page turning with a soft, unforgiving rasp. This vehicle, he said, tapping one document, was purchased under the Marlowe Community Fund's Accessibility Program. A program intended to provide transportation for residents with disabilities. The courtroom stiffened. Even Eliza seemed to brace herself, shoulders rising, then sinking as if she no longer had strength to keep the facade intact. Caprio continued, steady and precise. In the past 6 months, it appears the only individuals who used this car were members of your family. Murmurs rippled through the rows, disbelief, anger, and something like weariness. People her age would have shrugged this off. But the older folks in the room recognized the pattern, privilege-bending structures meant to help the vulnerable. Eliza didn't look up. Her eyes stayed on her hands, knuckles pale, fingers interlocked too tightly. A second document surfaced. Caprio's voice grew quieter, but firmer. And here, records indicating that the fund's mileage logs were altered. Several trips marked as community outreach occurred on days when, according to this evidence, the car was parked outside your family's private events. Someone in the back whispered, "That's not a mistake." Eliza swallowed hard. She didn't defend herself this time. Then Caprio gestured to a woman waiting near the aisle, a bank employee, mid-50s, plain blouse, weary kindness in her eyes. "Ma'am, please step forward." She did, clutching a small spiral notebook. "I've worked for her father 22 years, she began. "I love that family. I really do." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with grief. "She carries burdens she shouldn't," the woman said, looking at Eliza, not accusingly but with genuine ache. "She covers for him. Always. She thinks it's loyalty. A breath. But it's breaking her." Eliza's head snapped up, eyes glossy. The words landed harder than any evidence. The woman continued softly. "She's not the one who made the decisions. She's the one who lived with them." A hush fell across the courtroom, one of those deep, reverent silences that spoke louder than outrage. Caprio nodded solemnly and closed the folder. "Miss Marlowe," he said, "misusing charity assets is not merely a violation of policy. It erodes something far more valuable than money." He let the words settle, slow, heavy, honest. "It erodes trust." Eliza exhaled shakily. Not defiant. Not polished. Just tired, tired in a way that revealed how long she'd been holding up the weight of other people's choices. The pieces were no longer scattered. The picture was complete. Eliza rose slowly, as if every movement required permission she no longer had. She didn't look at her father's employee or the officer. She looked straight at Caprio. "I came here thinking I could steer this," she said, voice thin but steady. "That I could manage it the way I've been taught my whole life. Smile, control the room, smooth everything over. A breath. But all I've done is repeat his habits. And I don't want to become the version of him that hurts people." The words weren't dramatic. They were raw, so raw the room barely dared to breathe. Caprio leaned forward, hands clasped. Not triumphant. Not scolding. Simply present. "Miss Marlowe, you've spent years carrying responsibility that was never yours." His eyes softened. "And avoiding responsibility that was." She flinched, not from shame, but from recognition. "For the violations before this court," he continued, "your fines will stand. No reductions." For an instant she nodded, relieved the punishment was simple. But Caprio wasn't finished. "And because your family used a vehicle meant to serve the disabled, you will personally complete 100 hours of service at the Providence Accessibility Center. No delegation, no representatives. Your participation must be direct." Gasps fluttered through the room, surprise, approval, even admiration. It wasn't humiliation. It was accountability shaped into purpose. Eliza closed her eyes, then opened them with a clarity she hadn't shown all day. "I'll do it," she said softly. "All of it." Then something unexpected happened. An elderly woman in the second row, someone who had watched the entire hearing without speaking, murmured, loud enough for everyone. It's about time that girl gets a chance to be herself. No one laughed. But many nodded. Caprio gave a final, quiet verdict. Justice isn't here to tear you down. It's here to give you the space to change direction. A pause. And today, Miss Marlowe, you chose a better direction. The gavel never struck. It didn't need to. Eliza stepped away from the bench, moving without that signature self-assured stride, lighter now, almost unfamiliar. She passed the officer, the bank employee, the murmuring crowd. No one blocked her path. No one whispered insults. They simply watched a young woman walking out of a room not as the heir to a fortune, but as someone finally free to decide who she would become.